right, everybody. Rabbi Bob Alper is an author, stand-up comedian, and even, as we've said a million times, a rabbi. Bob, you should know that I am in strict competition with you because I believe I'm the funniest rabbi. No one agrees with me, but
Okay.
I think so.
Well, I'm going to try and be really serious so that you'll keep your role. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My co-rabbis, Rabbi Sheff and Rabbi Hirsch, who are here, they are rolling their eyes and just dying 1,000 deaths. They want me to stop talking. But anyway, Rabbi Alper has served congregations for 14 years. He also holds a doctorate from Princeton Theological Seminary. And he performs with a lot of different comedy partners, including Arab and Muslim comedians, which is of great interest to our community, and primarily at colleges and universities. He's been on all kinds of shows like Good Morning America and Showtime. For us, what's interesting is that he's also the author of 3 books. Thanks, I needed that. Life Doesn't Get Any Better Than This, and a graphic novel. Oh, look. Showing them all, a graphic cartoon novel called A Rabbi Confesses, and we are so glad you're here. We welcome you with open arms. We welcome your cousins by the dozens who are here watching your show also.
Good.
And thanks for being with us.
It's a pleasure. So thank you for having me. And I'm going to start with something local, okay? Because you're not far from White Plains, right? Okay. So you mentioned I do a show with Arab and Muslim comedians, which I do, and Christian comedians. It's called the Laugh and Peace Tour. I was performing with a guy named Mo Amr, who's Palestinian, in White Plains at Congregation Kol Ami. And we were driving back to the hotel, and Mo turned to me and said, Bob, I meant to ask you, what does Kol Ami mean? I said, well, it's Hebrew. It means voice of my people. He said, oh, because in Arabic it means eat my uncle. So before I start a chapter, let me tell you how I got into writing. As a comedian, I get a lot of applause and laughter. And one day I was thinking, what's missing in my life? And I realized the part that was missing in my life is rejection. So I decided, well, maybe I should write a book. And I wrote, a book, and then I tried to get an agent, and I got rejected. And then I got an agent, and then she tried to get a publisher, and we got rejections, and we got a publisher. So we had the rejection, and the first publisher, by the way, for my first book was called Life Doesn't Get Any Better Than This, was Liguori, which no one's ever heard of it. Liguori is the largest Catholic publisher in the country. And the editor who selected my manuscript felt that my material was similar to that of her former boss, Bishop Fulton J. Sheen, who was a priest from Rochester, who had a national TV show and was popular among people of all faiths. So they selected my book. The first printing of it had a little cross on the back, which I called a plus. I would go into Barnes & Noble, look for my book, and there it would be right under Christian literature. But that's okay. And that did very, very well. Then I put a second book out called Thanks, I Needed That, and my cartoon book. All of which are available at www.bobalper.com, BOBALPER. People think our name is Alpert, which actually was, but we dropped the T at a party in Boston. So you'll remember that. You get it at Amazon.com, and you get it through in Kindle version and hard paperback version. And the final plug I want to make, now that you know my website, bobalper.com, is I've been doing a thing called Quick Laugh. I'm doing it since the end of March, and I'll continue for another 3 months at least, where I put a short, 40-second, that's it, video on every morning at 10 o'clock. I got an email today from a rabbi who circulated among Reformed rabbis. Said he had 2 funerals today, and it's my quick laugh that keeps him going. It's wonderful. The response has been great. I did 70 bits from my act, and then the last 30 or so have been jokes that I tell. And in fact, I'll tell you one of the jokes in between some of the other stories. But to get on the list of Quick Laugh, and I hope you will, go to my website, bobalper.com, and you'll see on the front page, first of all, 7 minutes of a video of me doing stand-up. Then you see a 7-minute video of the Laugh and Peace Store with my Muslim and Christian friends. And then in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a place where you can put your email address in, sign up, and tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, you'll get a quick laugh. And you will on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for the next 3 months. And it helps people through this terrible, terrible time. So with that and all the ads out of the way, let me start by reading a story called December Memories. My father used to take showers with the lady next door. It was all pretty kosher. We rented half of a duplex house at 89 University Avenue in Providence, and the Wynn family occupied the other half. Duplex means different things in various places. In Providence, a duplex was a house with 2 separate entrances and 2 mirror image units. Ours had 3 floors and a basement suitable for Cub Scout den meetings. The way the house was designed, the bathrooms on the 2nd floor shared a common wall, tub alongside tub, and toilets back to back. The insulation was fairly thick, but subdued sounds could get through, and soon after the Wynn family moved into 91 University Avenue, my father and Ruth Wynn discovered that they observed similar morning shower routines. The muffled knocking back and forth on the tiles at 7:15 a.m., then a cute neighborhood joke, is now a piece of family folklore. My mother and Ruth became friends immediately. 40 years later and 400 miles apart, they were still dearly in love with each other. They shared laughter is what started it all off, but it was a hurricane called Carol that really brought us all together. For 8 days, Providence was without electricity, and neighbors drew closer to one another. Cold food went into the Keogh's old gas refrigerator at 85 University Avenue, while our battery-operated radio was the source for news and entertainment. The Wynn's vast quantities of sporting equipment helped everyone pass the time until that late afternoon when we were sitting on our porches and my mother suddenly yelled, "The lights are on!" Everyone rushed inside. The bonding held. The Wynn's oldest son, Cooper David Wynn IV, and I were classmates, though never best friends. Still, we spent lots of time together, as neighboring kids do, and some of the most memorable moments occurred around the December holidays. Hanukkah at my house, Christmas at his house. Mutual envy. For me, Hanukkah generally meant 1 gift from my parents per night, but factoring in additions from grandparents, other relatives, and friends, I averaged 16 to 20 each season. Not bad. I would even feel a bit on the smug side as I walked to school in the morning reporting to Cooper on the prior night's take. That is, I felt smug until early Christmas morning when I would race over to the Wynn side of the house to inspect the mountains of presents, the massive quantities strewn about the living room, such a volume of stuff that even the recognition in later years that the hall included a suspiciously large amount of underwear and socks could not make me rationalize away my jealousy. The feeling of Hanukkah has remained with me. The old tin menorah and the look, the smell, the soft, smooth texture of its candles, sometimes dripping their orange wax across my fingers. There were the traditional songs, the latkes and applesauce, and our one decoration, Happy Hanukkah, printed on colorful paper dreidels and placed across the dining room entranceway. The sign was worn, faded, but it was our tradition, and for 8 days it transformed the room into a chamber of happy expectation. Most of my presents were modest. I love to make Revell models of antique cars, so sometimes something like a Stanley steamer, or one night might be followed by a Stutz Bearcat the next. Another year it was accessories for my small American Flyer train set. One night it might be a new caboose, and another night a little building to place near the tracks. I remember categories of gifts, but the particulars have long faded. Except for 2 presents that I've never forgotten. The first was a 26-inch English bicycle. It arrived in the year when I went for the gold in the 8 small presents or 1 big present option game. Friday was designated the night, and as soon as the candles were lighted and the songs sung, I dutifully complied with the close your eyes tight directive. The waiting seemed to go on forever as I listened to my father's grunts and a bumping noise coming up the cellar steps. When he approached the dining room, I heard the rhythmic metallic sound of a spinning tire and knew that my year-long series of unsubtle hints had been acknowledged. Later, we went to synagogue, and before the service began, I stood in the foyer for what seemed like hours, watching as every person entered, brushing the snow off their coats and stomping their boots. I scanned the arrivals, looking for Joey or Sammy or Ricky or anyone else I knew. Guess what? I got an English bike. Other Hanukkahs, though, were not as festive. My parents constantly struggled financially, one of the consequences of my father's checkered career, and made worse later by the albatross of medical bills from my sister's long illness. My father was always involved in the paper business. During the 8 years when we lived on University Avenue, he worked for at least 6 different companies in waste paper, paper chemicals, and wholesale tissue. Each position would begin with optimism and end with him returning home one night carrying his electric typewriter. But he always bounced back, always landed another job somewhere, somehow. Yet the process was draining, and the weeks or months between paychecks grim. One of those dark periods coincided with Hanukkah. I knew things were tough that season. We didn't starve, but everything had to be cut back as we tried to make do on the salary my mother earned fitting women into corsets at the Peerless department store. I know it's hard, she would say, but someday our ship will come in. I believed her. Sometimes I could even visualize our ship, a small speck on the horizon, heading slowly, surely right for us. Our ship, burdened with riches, was still far out to sea when Hanukkah began. This year, I knew, would not be like others. My grandparents and a few of my parents' friends came through, but my parents explained I would need to understand that they simply couldn't afford presents this time. Just this year. Next year will be better. Hanukkah overlapped Christmas fortuitously. The Winds were busy with their preparations, so I didn't see much of Cooper. I was glad school was already on vacation. There was no need to report to friends on my Jewish version of an empty stocking. That Christmas morning, I didn't rush next door. On the final night of Hanukkah, my parents surprised me with a gift. It was a small one, they warned, nothing very special. But I'd been so understanding of what was happening that they wanted me to have it. I felt a slight twinge of guilt over their sacrifice as I accepted the little package. Inside the box was a plastic model for my collection, a replica of a criss-crossed cabin cruiser. Probably cost about $1.95. I glued it together the next day, and for years, until I went off to college, the little boat sat on a shelf in my bedroom. It was far from being my fanciest model. Though it's long been discarded, the thought of it means more to me now than it ever did back then. When I look back on all those Decembers of my childhood, those often wonderful days of mystery, anticipation, celebration, I know for a fact that I received many dozens of presents over the course of the years. They form an indistinct blur. After all, a long time has passed. In truth, of all those gifts, I can actually remember only two. Only two. One was a 26-inch English bicycle, shiny black, 3-speed, with a headlight powered by a generator that spun alongside the tire and its own silver air pump latched to the frame. The other was a plastic model boat. So, we live in East Dorset, Vermont, which is near Manchester, Vermont. We moved here 30 years ago, and one of the first things I did when I moved here was join the AJCO, which is the Association of Jewish Chainsaw Owners. They say the Jewish population of Vermont is somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 year-round. During the ski season, that number rises to 1.7 million. And I ski. The benefit of living in Vermont is that you can ski whenever you want to. I mean, I do what's called geezer skiing. So, in other words, it's got to be a beautiful day, conditions perfect. And I'll go at 10 o'clock in the morning, ski for a couple hours, have lunch with my friends, and go home. It's only 25 minutes away from my house. But if I want to, and I'm alone, I do it. And those of you who ski know when you get to the lift, you have to identify yourself so you can pair up for the lift capacity. And I was there one time, I skied up and I yelled, single, single. And I heard a voice behind me say, ever wonder why? That was, we're very proud of our state university, by the way. Apparently at the University of Vermont, Hebrew, Russian, and German are all located in the same building. It's called the Department of Semitic and Anti-Semitic Languages. And we actually have Jewish farmers here in Vermont, Jewish farmers. They're pretty easy to spot. In the summer, they drive tractors with Florida license plates. So anyway, so that's Vermont. But I'm also going to tell you about a New York story, a Manhattan story. It's called The Saxophone Player. By the way, a lot of these stories, I'd say at least half of them, they're a total of 76, 78 stories in the two books, which means if you like this program, we could do it again and again and again and again and again because I got so many stories. So it's hard to pick which ones to read, of course. But probably half these stories began as sermons because I like to tell stories in my sermons that illustrate a lesson. And I'm sure that story about Hanukkah was started as a sermon. This one I know is used in a sermon, The Saxophone Player. 2, Chicago City Council, from Robert A. Alper. Subject, nickname, ladies and gentlemen. I had the pleasure of visiting your delightful city during a December weekend and spent some time among the throngs of holiday shoppers strolling the elegant, magnificent mile. As I approached each intersection, it occurred to me that it may be time to change your town's nickname to one that more accurately reflects a typical visitor's impression. Instead of the Windy City, why not call Chicago the city of really annoying saxophones? Inside the loop, it seemed that the musicians were everywhere, at every cross street, in every sidewalk niche, instruments blaring Christmas songs and plush cases open to receive contributions from adoring, grateful passersby. Some of the players were halfway decent, and most of them, I assume, could also play other wind instruments like oboes and flutes. But it's the loud, scratchy, raspy saxophones that attract attention. They make perfect street instruments. They make me crazy. I had a chance to play the saxophone myself. At some point in his youth, my father was a saxophone player. Oddly, I never knew whether he was talented or not, because I never recall hearing him play. But his old silver gray saxophone stands out as one of those household treasures that a little kid like myself would investigate now and again, carefully opening the case and inhaling the pungent odor of metal and wooden reeds and green felt material that both cushioned the case and lined the mysterious air valves along the curving length of the instrument. By the time I finished trying to make sounds come out of the thing, I had usually broken the reed, but my father never seemed to mind. I didn't do it that often anyway, and I expressed no desire to take lessons. I wanted to play the bugle. There was power in that instrument and respect. Camp Westwood awakened to its sound, assembled at its command, saluted the flag, reported to activities, dined, swam, and extinguished the lights, all in response to the calls of Bobby Gormley's bugle. My 8-year-old logic convinced me that since my name was also Bobby, I could easily become Gormley's heir apparent. When I returned home from camp, I announced my intentions. My mother, the descendant of a non-musical family, was delighted with this genetic left turn and immediately surprised me with a rented trumpet, quote, because the dealer said you should learn trumpet and then get a bugle. I feigned excitement, meanwhile feeling genuinely irked that I hadn't been consulted during the selection process. I took lessons for a while, but never became a trumpet player, thanks mainly to Senator Joseph McCarthy. Here's why. My teacher, Mr. Arthur Tancredi, a very nice man, came to our home one afternoon each week in an effort to mold the next Herb Alpert. But the Army McCarthy hearings were on television during those very same hours, and Mr. Tancredi spent more time watching the proceedings than listening to me run scales. 12 weeks into the arrangement, the instrument rental period expired. My parents were faced with the choice of renewing the rental or making a purchase. I would have been happy with a bugle, but they went for the shiny new gold trumpet, and in a masterful stroke of guilt production, they traded in my father's old saxophone as a partial payment. I can still see them surrendering Dad's heirloom over the counter to the dealer. So one can imagine how absolutely awful I felt when I didn't practice and eventually dropped the playing of the trumpet altogether. But I had acquired enough musicianship to win a place as substitute bugler at Camp Westwood. When I played, my friend would stand squarely in front of me, dramatically sucking lemons. I didn't think they were very funny. Once my camp days ended, the trumpet was passed on to my younger cousin Tommy, whose similar lack of talent confirmed once again that Herb Alpert would have no competition from quasi-namesakes. For years, decades, I didn't think much about saxophones until that December afternoon walking along Chicago's screedy streets. Then a few months later, I came face to face with a huge version of the instrument. Face to face, literally. It happened on a Saturday night in Manhattan. I had officiated at a wedding at an historic hall somewhere in the financial district and was riding the subway uptown to my cousin's apartment, where my family awaited me. A pleasant spring evening around 8:30, the swaying car was half full with the usual New York assortment of ages and races and ethnic backgrounds, readers, sleepers, loquacious teenagers, and a pretty boring-looking guy, me, in a suit and tie, all bouncing along, minding our own business. He entered the car through the connecting door. Probably had been on the next car for a while and now decided to bless us with his presence. He was most likely in his 20s, although it was hard to tell his age or even see his dark brown face beneath the full beard of long orange-brown dreadlocks flying out in different directions. The car had picked up speed, making it difficult for him to negotiate the aisle. A drunk? On drugs? Or did his tipsy movements reflect the natural difficulty one would encounter when attempting to walk a shaky path while carrying a satchel in one hand and in the other a very large saxophone? He stopped directly in front of where I was sitting and regained his balance by taking a wide stance. The bag stored safely between his feet. He looked around briefly, then raised the instrument to his lips. My face, my ears to be specific, were no more than 18 inches from the business end of the sax. He began to play. Surprisingly sweet music, mellow, plaintive and evocative? No, it was horrendous. I had hoped for an undiscovered Kenny G. Instead, we were treated to a woodwind version of Canada Geese en route to Fort Lauderdale. As the shrieks of the instrument monopolized the train, the passengers began speaking to one another with their eyes. Downcast eyes, sideward glances, disgusted looks, resigned looks, eyes buried deeper and deeper in newspapers and books, emerging every few seconds to check reality. Eyes commiserating with one another, eyes of prisoners complaining to one another about their captor. The song concluded dramatically with 3 outrageous shrieks. We braced ourselves, watching furtively as our musician slowly lowered his saxophone until it hung by its lanyard across his chest. Then he reached into his sack, grabbed an empty Maxwell House coffee container, and once again stood erect. Here's real trouble, I thought. Why couldn't I have chosen a different car, or at least a different seat? The conversation of the eyes fell silent as everyone watched the intruder, tensely, defensively, awaiting the finale to this scene from the theater of the streets. He did not disappoint us. In fact, he amazed us. With the slightest nod of his head and an almost imperceptible grin, the saxophone player called out just 5 words in a lilting Jamaican accent. "Money makes me go away." Here's what happened. People laughed. The books and newspapers and other shields fell into laps. One voice, soon joined by others, began calling gleefully, "More, play some more." Change purses and wallets opened willingly, and the coffee can was soon brimming with green as the musician completed his circumnavigation of the car. Stranger spoke to stranger, extolling the brilliance of our shared drama and its orchestrator. For 45 seconds, we were a special community, astonished, smiling, relaxed, intoxicated with unexpected joy from a most unexpected source. The subway pulled into the next station. The saxophone player replaced his coffee can in his bag, gathered his belongings, and walked onto the platform with the departing passengers. Others entered the car, took their seats, and began to read their papers or sleep or talk softly with their companions. The train lurched forward. The entire drama took 4 minutes. But here's what also happened. When I arrived at my cousin's apartment, I had a marvelous story to tell, a funny story that set the tone for a very enjoyable evening. I suspect that the 35 or 40 other subway concert participants reacted similarly, all of us now amateur troubadours recounting our unique adventure that concluded joyously with the words, "Money makes me go away." It could have been different. The saxophone player could have uttered words that would have left his audience feeling frightened, menaced, tense, bitter, invaded. And we all might have arrived at our destinations drained, agitated, bigotry confirmed, anger ready to be displaced on handy targets. If one believes, as I do, that one way we relate to God is by our refracting the rays of creation, affecting the next moment for good or for evil, then the saxophone player's 5 words were, yes, funny, effective, memorable, but also divine. He became a partner with God, giving humanity a little nudge in a worthy direction. And like the ripples on a pond, the positive influence of that small subway drama continued to flow outward, even to today, to the telling of this story. Religious history is filled with tales of prophets and sages, saints and madwomen and madmen, scholars and simpletons, mystics and wonder workers, all of whom are remembered for one common reason. They made special contributions to that ongoing act of creation. I wonder who the saxophone player really was. So, I can, let's see. Oh, I'll do a couple jokes. All right? Some of my favorite jokes. A couple was celebrating their 65th birthday. They had been born around the same time, and a genie appeared. Genie said, "You've been lovely people. I'm going to grant each of you one wish." The wife said, I've always dreamed of taking a round-the-world cruise," and poof, she had 2 tickets in her hand. The husband said, "Well, as for me, I've always wanted to have a wife who's 30 years younger than I am." And poof, he was 95. Let's see. I'm gonna do a gallery view again and see more. Oh, good. I can see more people. Terrific. Yeah, I just watched it. So let's see. A rabbi visited a senior residence, and she said to the man, "How old are you, sir?" He said, "Rabbi, I'm 87." She said, "Wonderful. May you live on Me'av Esrim to 120 like Moses, our teacher." And to a second woman, "How old are you?" She said, "Rabbi, I'm actually 91. "Oh, marvelous. You should live to be 120 like Moses." Goes to a third man, "How old are you, sir?" He said, "Rabbi, you may not believe it, but I'm 120 years old." The rabbi says, "Have a nice day." So I talk a little bit about my dog. No, the weddings, weddings. I officiated a lot of weddings in my life, tons and tons of weddings. The worst have to be outdoor summer events. I had one wedding back in Philadelphia. It was 99 degrees in the middle of July. I was, everyone stayed in the air conditioned reception room at the very last moment. When it was time to begin, The ushers escorted all the elderly people out first, which is, it was kind of a courtesy so the older folks can spend just a little extra time in the heat and humidity. A couple came out, dragged themselves down the aisle. When they reached me, the bride looked at me imploringly, and she said, "Rabbi, it's so hot. Could you please make it a quick ceremony?" I said, "Do you both want to be married?" They said yes. I said, "You are." In a very nervous room, I said, "Phil, would you please face Nancy and recite the vows?" He said, A-E-I-O-U. Another wedding. This is, it's really weird doing comedy when you can't hear anything. So, it sounds like, well, when I was starting out in comedy, I'd do comedy clubs, and I wasn't good. I had a lot of silence, and so I would tell a joke that would bomb, and I only had one comeback. I looked at the audience and said, "I told that joke on purpose. I want to see what an after-death experience is like." And that's what it's like when you try and do something funny and you can't hear. But that's the problem with Zoom. But I can see your smiles, which is great. So anyhow, so let me see what else we got here. Okay, take a little drink. So this is called Lust and Love. And then we'll do Q&A at the end. It's a good thing sensitivity training and sexual harassment awareness weren't around in 1954, because I would have been in big trouble. It was just before lunch in Miss Hanley's 4th grade class. I can't recall all the details, but I do know that for some reason I snuck up beside Lenore Dubinsky, the prettiest girl in the class, and kissed her full on her right cheek. The recipient wrinkled her freckled nose, shot me a semi-disgusted look, and continued her conversation with Tina Marks. I retreated victoriously to my seat, front left side of the room. As always, my last name begins with A, and then my lips began to burn. Not an intense heat, just a kind of warm, tingly sensation. I didn't quite know what to make of it until I started thinking of the lyrics of a popular song, and the term "kiss of fire" began running through my mind. That's what it was, the kiss of fire. My 9-year-old mind convinced me that Lenore was the one, that even though she completely ignored me now, we are somehow destined to be with each other. I needed only wait for it to happen. And so I waited. I never told Lenore about the kiss of fire, and I never dated her, although we were classmates right on through high school. I should inject that when we went back for our 25th high school reunion, the guy was arranging it, said, "By the way, Lenore's coming, and she's bringing her lawyer." So, but we're still friends. Lenore and Martina, I mentioned, we're friends. Anyway. So finally, though, it occurred to me that on that fateful day of the kiss, Lenore had probably applied some kind of medicine to her prepubescent face, and my sensitive, moist little lips initiated a chemical reaction that resulted in physical, but not really metaphysical heat. Ever since I began riding my battered little Schwinn bicycle to Jean Brown's house in the 2nd grade, or stood up Corey Goldenberg, my first real date in the 3rd grade, it was a misunderstanding, and the following week I took her to see Hondu in 3D. I always wrestled with the question of love and marriage. Frequently I'd consider the fact that somewhere in the world there was a person I would marry. I probably hadn't met her yet. On the other hand, maybe I knew her well. Maybe it was even Lenore or Corey or Tina. It was fun to speculate. It was also confusing. What exactly is love, and why do people choose each other? When we think of it, we're all amateurs at selecting a marriage partner, unless, of course, we're approaching it for a 2nd or 3rd or 4th time, in which case our status lies somewhere between expert and serial failure. No matter how we go about it, though, it seems to me that one of the biggest stumbling blocks is the widely accepted and bizarrely inaccurate cliche, "It was love at first sight." Really? How can one fall in love, true love, just by taking a look at a person? That's not love at all. It's lust. I'm not frightened by the word lust. It's a good word, an apt word that describes what can be a very appropriate emotion in the right context. Lust is what draws people to each other, assuring the perpetuation of our species. One sees an attractive person across a crowded room, and it can be lust at first sight. Later, the lust might actually turn to love, and it might not. Take, for instance, an average young lawyer, a fairly intelligent fellow cruising the Saturday night bar scene at a local restaurant. From out of the corner of his eye, he spots an adorable young woman, nicely dressed, with an appealing figure and a pleasant manner. This could be love at first sight, he thinks, as he elbows his way through the raucous crowd. And just as he closes in on this woman of his dreams, he hears her declare to those in her group, "Darn, don't that Rush Limbaugh just hit the nail on the head?" Our attorney may still feel a smidgen of lust, but love will probably not be an option here. Just how does one make the transition from lust to love? Each person's stories are unique. Mine might be instructive. One of the many times I fell in lust occurred during an early summer of 1964. I had just finished my sophomore year at Lehigh University and was visiting my parents in Bennington, Vermont, a town to which they had moved after I graduated from high school. During earlier school vacations, I had made some local friends, and that night I decided to visit Bill and his younger sister Allison at their home. There wasn't a lot to do in Bennington, Vermont in those days. Mainly what we do was watch a little TV, walk outside and sit on someone's motorcycle, and go back for more TV. That was about it. Except that on this particular night, Allison was hosting a party for 6 or 7 of her girlfriends with whom she just graduated from high school. They were all sitting on their kitchen floor for some reason when I arrived, and from my vantage point, standing by the stove, I was able to survey the entire group to see if any interested me. One did. I fell slightly, preliminarily, in lust. We dated a few times that summer, and then it was an on-again, mostly off-again relationship for the next 6 months. In February of my junior year, I visited her in Manhattan. Then a freshman at Bennington College, she was spending her non-resident term interning at an accounting firm. It's the winter season between January and March when the school closes and the students go out and get jobs for 3 months. We enjoyed a mildly beatnik evening, as was the custom of Bennington women and the men who squired them in that era. She wore black from head to toe. Our wanderings took us from an avant-garde theater to a coffee house, all, of course, in Greenwich Village. It was a delicious night, made even better when she agreed to attend a major party at Lehigh 2 weeks later. The following Sunday evening, I was summoned to the phone at the fraternity house. She was calling to back out. I just got pinned. Sure, pinned. The old engaged to become engaged bit. I knew that getting pinned was something a Bennington woman wouldn't be caught dead doing. But maybe going to a fraternity party fell into that same category. Whatever the reason, I had been dumped. Fast forward to late January of my senior year, when I had a few days to kill between semesters, and now finally also had my very first car. Maybe she was back in New York, maybe even unpinned. And besides, I rationalized, nearly a year has passed, so I'm ready to be humiliated again. I tracked her down. During this non-resident term, she was not in Manhattan, but, of all places, Scranton, Pennsylvania, the city to which her parents had recently moved. She was even happy to hear from me, although I suspect that living temporarily in Scranton, she would have been happy to hear from anybody. A few days later, I drove up to see her. It's funny what you remember about events so long ago. My Rambler's transmission made strange noises on the drive up, and one repairman in Scranton warned that only a major overhaul would get me on the road again. Another mechanic tightened a plug, added some fluid, and the car was good for another 6 months until I sold it. Most of all, of course, I remember my date. I guess that after 18 months of knowing her, I was still in lust. And proper lust does serve an important function, such as drawing me to Scranton in pursuit of a girl who had already rejected me several times. We decided to go to a good restaurant, one fancy enough to take reservations. This was 1966. I wore a suit and tie, and she wore her best dress, black, of course. That winter, she was working as an aide at a school for severely retarded children, a sad place populated by about 40 boys and girls, from infants to adolescents. On the way to the restaurant, she suggested we detour slightly and stop by the school so she could show it to me. It was more than 50 years ago, but I'll never forget what happened when we came through the large doors and into the foyer. Some of the staff and a few of the children were standing about or sitting on the floor of the adjacent rooms. As soon as we walked within their sight, we heard a very happy yelp as a 5-year-old boy with Down syndrome raced awkwardly out of the living room and toward my date. It was not a pretty sight. His shirt bore the remains of his recently eaten spaghetti dinner, and his cheeks were red with tomato sauce. A combination of old and new mucus, some dried, some still glistening, cascaded from his nose, and even an expert chemist would be incapable of determining all that was stuck to his hands. I flinched as he drew closer and prepared somehow to guard my newly dry-cleaned suit from what I knew would be a very grimy touch. He ran toward us, calling out a word over and over, a word I could not understand. My date interpreted it for me. It was her name that he was shouting with such delight. Just as the little boy reached us, the Bennington girl, in her black tights and best dress and long dangly earrings, bent forward and with a graceful rhythm caught the child and lifted him in her arms till they were face to face, giving him the monumental hug he so correctly expected. I looked on, amazed. I realized that in her schedule of priorities, her clothing and her combed hair and her freshly scrubbed face meant absolutely nothing in comparison to hugging that little boy. I also realized that ever since I crashed a party 18 months before, I had been in lust. Now I was in love. 3.5 years later, we were married. Thank you. So I'll finish the story a little bit. I'll add to it. What happened was when I crashed the pajama party, as I think I mentioned, so the girls were sitting on the floor of the kitchen. And I looked down and I saw one really cute girl in pink baby doll pajamas. And I thought to myself, wow, I bet she would look hot in clothes. Okay, true story. I didn't think that then. But while doing stand-up comedy, I thought, well, that would be a good joke. So I added that to my routine. I talk about Sherry a lot in my routine. I talk about even when she had a colonoscopy. Sherry had a colonoscopy. Oh, we all do, and we should, if you don't. It was late afternoon. I was in the hospital in Bennington. She was, I was in the waiting room, and there was one man watching television, kind of blaring. I was on the other end of the room trying to read, and we were the only two men in the room. A nurse walked in. She said, Mr. Albert? I said, well, it's Alper. She said, well, your wife is all set. Let me take you to her room. We got there. She said, would you like me to see if she's ready? I said, thank you, but married for 50 years. So I walked into the room, and there was Mrs. Albert. She was not ready. So I talk about our family. We have a dog and a cat. I say how the dogs and their owners, they begin to look alike and act alike. There's a little reciprocity goes on between them. And I say, in our house, it's kind of strange. My dog gives me kisses, and my wife turns around 3 times before she sits. Anyway, it's 9 o'clock. I'd be delighted to hang around. If any of you would like to unmute, if you have any questions you'd like to ask me, I'd be more than delighted. I'm not going anywhere. So I'm not going anywhere for the next at least 2 months. So any questions? If you do, unmute yourself and ask away. Very quiet group. Okay. I don't see anybody now. Anybody? All right. Well, I'll leave you in another couple jokes. Can I do that?
question.
Raise your hand.
Oh, here's somebody.
We have a question.
Yes, I've been getting your joke every day.
Uh-huh.
How did you start that? I've really been enjoying them.
Thank you very much. Thanks. I realize everyone's going to be housebound. I realize this is a very sad time, a very stressful time. And humor, there's a spirituality to humor. It's holy, and it has ways of helping people in critical ways, sometimes more than other ways. And so I decided to do this. I have a guy in India who does my graphics, and he put it together. And then actually a woman in Czechoslovakia, it's a long story, but I went through old videos of shows that I'd done. One was in Bridgeport, Connecticut. One was in, I think, Detroit. Another one was at, I don't know where. Anyway, in Raleigh, North Carolina. That's exactly it. And I indicated from, 2 minutes and 12 seconds through 2 minutes and 48 seconds. That's one joke, and we'll call it Grandpa, because it's about a grandfather. And then, I did that, and then I sent it off to this woman in Czechoslovakia. She took them, separated them, put the titles on them, and put them on YouTube so we could put, anyway. That's how we got and then it's about 70 or 75 things from my routine. And then I had a lot of video of me doing jokes. So that's I did about 20 or 25 jokes from the routine. So turned out a total of 90. They're ending in 3 days with a video of my dog. That's the finale. But what I'm going to do is the day after that, I'm going to start running the first one over again. Because here's the deal. I can't remember stuff. And neither can you. Secondly, they're funny. I mean, I put them on and I crank it up, and I've told it's not that I'm singing for the first time. It's a joke I've told 750 times, and I see it and I laugh because they're funny. So I think people can watch them a second time or even the third time. I can watch them over and over again. And also they're nice and short. The brevity, I think, was the best part of it, because I don't know about you, but I get tons of videos. Oh, got to see this video. It's very funny. 5 minutes in, you'll get a chuckle. Oh, I don't have time to do that. But these things, 40 seconds and you're done. Anyway, that's another joke that's in there. I'm gonna tell. I don't know if this is. Yeah, I think it's one of them I used, but it's one of my favorites. A Jewish guy was out in the woods all by himself, and suddenly behind me, I heard kind of a looks over his shoulder. There's a 9-foot grizzly about to attack him. Well, he was religious. He said, "Please, God, I ask this miracle one time only. Let this be a Jewish bear." Looks over his shoulder, and there's the bear praying too. So he finished the prayer, went over to schmooze with the bear, and as he got closer, he could hear the bear saying, "Hamotzi lechem min haaretz." One that was recently on was a guy says to a friend, "I had a terrific time out in the town last night with my girlfriend and her twin." Friend says, "That's great, but I mean, how could you tell them apart?" He said, her brother had a mustache." So, let's see. I got my list of jokes. This was yesterday, but I love it. So, a young man named Kleinberg. By the way, I do another program called The Spirituality of Laughter. And it's a lecture on Jewish humor and other humor and the importance of laughter, blah, blah, blah. And this is a joke that I do to illustrate that flatulence is the second most popular subject for jokes. The first is sex. It goes back centuries and centuries, millennia. Flatulence always. Benjamin Franklin wrote a book called Fart Proudly. You can look up, you can get it on Amazon. Fart Proudly by Benjamin Franklin. So here's the joke that illustrates humor and flatulence. A young man named Kleinberg won a very prestigious award. So much so that the entire community gave a banquet in his honor. And there was a lot of eating, a lot of drinking, a lot of speeches, applause, laughter. It was a great evening. At the end, it was his turn to acknowledge. Got up there, and unfortunately, halfway through his speech, one of his pages floated off the lectern. As he bent over to pick it up, unfortunately, he broke wind. How can I say it? He broke wind. And the microphone was placed in such a way that it caught it and it kind of broadcasted over the entire group there. Well, he was so mortified that the first chance he got, he moved out of that city. And he never came back. When he was an old man, he decided he wanted to go see his city of birth one more time. And so he did. He went to a hotel. He registered under an assumed name. The clerk was very nice. He said, "Is this your first time in our city?" He said, "No, actually, I was born and spent my childhood here." "Oh, well, I guess you've seen all the progress since every time you come back, the riverfront project and the big shopping district, the theater." He said, "No, actually, I haven't been back. Haven't been back for a long time." "Really? How long has it been since you've been back?" And Kleinberg said, "It's been a very, very long time." The clerk said, "Well, was it before or after the Kleinberg fart?" So anyway, let's see. I'll leave you.
Give us one more, Bob. Come on. You can't end with a fart. No way.
That's very good. So a guy who was in Northern Ireland. The troubles were still going on in Northern Ireland, and a guy had to run an errand late at night. He was afraid of what would happen, and certainly it did. As he went through a dark alley, he felt a gun in his ribs, and a voice behind him said, "What are you, Protestant or Catholic?" I thought for a minute, "Oh my God, if I say I'm Protestant, it's the IRA, I've had it. But if I say I'm Catholic, it's the Ulster Defense, I'm dead." So I thought for another minute, and finally said, "I'm Jewish." And from behind me, I heard a voice say, "Well, faith in me, Gora, if I am not the luckiest Arab in all Northern Ireland." Or a couple, let's see, a couple was having a lot of problems in their marriage, and they went to a therapist, and things were not going well. The husband was sitting there passive aggressively glowering, and the wife was yelling and screaming. The therapist said, "I've got to do a creative intervention here." So he picked the wife up to her feet and gave her a 45-second kiss on the lips like she'd never had in her life. Put her back in her chair. She was bleary-eyed and speechless. The therapist says to the husband, "That's what she needs, and she needs it twice a week." The husband says, "I could have her here on Mondays and Thursdays." Okay. So listen, thank you all very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Bob. I hope that if you're ever looking for the central heart of Judaism and you find yourself in Rockland County, you'll come see us at OJC when we can be all together again.
I would love to. You're good. I could see you're good laughers. I'd love to hear you laughing.
Yeah, we're a really joyful congregation. We'd love to welcome you one day there. And thank you. I highly recommend everyone get those clips. Harriet and I are not the only ones receiving those clips from Rabbi Alper. It really is a little chuckle every day. And you can share them and become very popular among your friends when you share one of the clips. So thank you, Bob. Thank you so much. 2 shows in one night. The stories were really wonderful. Well, just really wonderful. And everyone, we'll see you tomorrow at 5 for Olympics, 7:30 Minion. Whenever we see you, we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks. Bye, everybody. Take care.